why I'm interested in this is, to me, this is just a case study in how late capitalism works in all sorts of ways. So it's not just, like Nik's failure to organize to stop fracking is lined up with our failure to organize to even minimize climate change in any substantial way. Or one of the things I want to talk about is like my frustrations in the Kansas City's like intentional community and local ag scene. I think it's basically a barely mitigated shit show for basically the same reasons. And that's what I think we're here to talk about today.
I think that just as we're living in a nuclear age, we have grown so tremendously in scientific knowledge. It doesn't seem too much to say that men can begin to awaken to the fact that they haven't grown enough spiritually and haven't recognized their spiritual capacities.
Once something like eating is death, then you've struck at the very heart of life. The enemy of the older radical theories may have been the ruling class, but today the stakes of whether we will reform ourselves into a new kind of human being, a new kind of society, whether we will find selves worth being, the stakes of it are simply life itself.
Modernity has created promises that it has no ability to keep. What this means is that we're a society of disembedded individuals stuck in the impossible situation of being alone together. And what was understood as emancipation has proved to be a form of isolation. It is important to understand that what I am telling you is not simply a cultural history. It's a description of the story that shapes every single person that you know. This is why there is a rise in mental illness. It's absolutely concurrent with the disembedding of the individual, because individuals can't constitute themselves by the very nature of the case. Subjectivity cannot sustain its own weight. We need others to tell us. But we've been given an ethical mandate by the Enlightenment that tells us that that's immoral, that nobody should constrain us.
So we're back with Nik Gaffron, who talked to us last time about his experiences with fracking and trying to organize people against fracking in Pennsylvania. And I'm here with Spencer Hess, and we're ready to talk to Nik about why it is that he had such a hard time organizing people or helping to organize people against what was an obvious threat to their own way of life and their own well-being. Nik, would you want, I know that you talked about this last time, but could you just kind of summarize your feelings about like why, how hard it was and kind of why you think it was that hard to do?
Well, we really delved in full force over the course of many long months. It consumed our lives, acquiring all the information and attempting to disseminate that information to the people around us, in our local area and outside of our local area. We felt it was the most important thing to show people what this process is. We're so sure that the information that we gave them on all the damage that is done by fracking and the ways you're manipulated into it and the ways that, you're promised, this money, and it's not nearly as much money as it should be, or, even if you get a good amount of money, like it's just nothing compared to what you're giving up, and definitely nothing compared to the cost on the environment. So we just really wanted to believe that just putting all this information out there while we were also working on the legal routes would get people to rally behind this cause. And after any of our talks or meetings, or we'd go around and we'd do these PowerPoints, or we'd go to these community events and talk to people. People would always be enthusiastic. Like, we didn't run into a lot of people that like, were adamantly against or adamantly for fracking. Like, we didn't hit a ton of resistance, like outwardly, or aggressive resistance, but people would always say like, oh, that's so good, this is so informative, like I can't believe it does all this, and we'd point them towards other resources as well to like have more information and confirm these things, and we'd really put all that knowledge in people's hands, and then they would just not ever show up when it mattered, or just ever again, like they were appreciative in the moment, or they liked what happened at the moment. And it's interesting that they would show up to the talk, like we would put out flyers and advertise things, and we had obviously these Facebook groups, and we would link up with other things and get the word out, and people would come to the talks. But then at the town hall meetings, we were the only ones there. Just however many of us, maybe not even half of the group of core people. We're talking like maybe 6 people would show up. And so in these meetings, like you're allowed very little time. It's only in like the questions at the back after they've discussed everything are you really allowed to say anything. And then like, it's not enough time to explain why this is not good or why they should do more research into anything. And they seemingly don't want to hear you anyway. And so when there's just not they're looking out on 6 people in the crowd, and then like maybe a handful of others who just come to these community meetings, sitting there doing their knitting or whatever. And that to them isn't any sort of opposition to this, like there's no interest in stopping any of this, and they're being offered money. And so why would they, so why exactly people would show up to get the information, and then once they had the information, that was like enough for them. Like I think they would probably just go and tell their friends and family this thing that they heard, and think that that was some sort of active protest.
Did you kind of give a call to action at the end of your educational talks? Like, now we want you to show up for this town hall meeting, right? Like right there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like we would always encourage people, like we would say, hey, North Huntington is having a meeting on this in like 2 weeks. If you could show up there, that'd be great. And people, oh yeah, we'll be there.
Right. And, to go to a meeting is not a huge expenditure of your time or effort, just to go to a town hall meeting or city council meeting or something like that. But you weren't even able to get people to show up to that, even though it sounds like they resonated with your message and were sympathetic. So, I mean, this is a huge question, right? Like a huge puzzle. Why is it so hard to get people to actually do something? And that's not even all that much. It's just going to a meeting.
Yeah, that is what really surprised me, because those town hall meetings were the only place that anybody, like just as a people speaking out against it without taking any legal action, like that would be the place that the people could say like, we don't want this. And like they would just fail to do that. Now, with like other protests and doing civil disobedience and that sort of thing, like you're going up against the state and there's police there and you could be arrested and have a permanent record, and there might be consequences to your protesting. But this is not that, like maybe on some level there is some concern that showing up and making noise, like, would shine a spotlight on you. And maybe a lot of people want to avoid that spotlight, they want to vote behind closed doors. But it's like when the destructive nature of things is actively happening, it like a vote takes too long, like in the time we were fighting this, they had already done the fracking.
Right. Yeah, I remember one of the things that I remember from our talk that just really shocked me last time was that you guys didn't even know that they had already done the fracking because they'd been fracking so far out from where they were. They'd literally gone under a river or something like that, and they fracked an area that I guess on the surface you couldn't even see, and you weren't informed of that and didn't
Nope.
even know that going in. I mean, that's a whole nother issue of just like deception and stuff. But you know, to like say to people, we just want you to exercise your already pre-existing democratic right to show up at this meeting and say, you know, what you think or support our position. It shouldn't be all that scary. But I wonder how many people are literally intimidated or just, well, I mean, there's probably laziness is a factor, not wanting to go to a meeting, but I don't know, like, this is the problem of organizing people. On the left, we're talking about on the left, or at least on issues that are not.
Although I'd say in any kind of radical way.
Yeah, well, the right seems to be able to organize pretty effectively.
But do they?
Well, all right, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? Because I'm thinking, yes, they do.
Why? What have they done?
They got a president elected.
And what did he do?
Well, like that's a whole nother, yeah, like nothing great, but
Even by their standards, what did he do?
good question.
Well, I think for your conservative causes, like there sure seems to be the weight is on your side because we know that the money motivates people. If the conservative cause was to, yes, let's get fracking done, let's get in there, we need to get this natural gas, we want cheap oil for 30 years, you know, you don't even have to show up to the town hall to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening, the money's there and it's happening.
Sure.
Yeah. It's an easier sell.
Right. And if we define right-wing politics or conservative politics as just furthering extractive industry, then absolutely the weight of the economic and social system is on their side.
Which a lot of it is, even the stuff that's kind of like tangential to it, seemingly like being anti-immigrant or whatever. But I'm just making an observation that at least like right now, it does seem like they are capable of mustering quite a bit more attention and even action. And so to me, part of the puzzle is, why is it that the resistance to capital, or, you know, the pushback, why is that having such a harder time of organizing? Why is it that various like laudable causes like environmental protection, you know, is not nearly as easy a sell?
And I guess I would argue like the answer is obviously because under capitalism, we incentivize stuff that's going to extract resources and allow commodities to circulate. And as soon as you're trying to preserve the environment, you're doing something that is like primarily negative, in the sense of we're saying like, no, let's keep, it's really a conservative argument, let's keep the park the way it is. Let's not mine it. Well, then that's not going to generate resources. It's not going to generate revenue unless the plan is, well, let's turn it into like a permaculture orchard or something. In which case, then you're trying to do something positive, but then it's like, okay, well, how are you going to raise the money to plant these trees? And then where's the labor going to come from to allow those commodities to circulate?
I mean, you want to talk about your own experience regarding this at all? I know this is kind of a sore spot for you, but like, are you up for that, Spencer?
Sure. I mean, I think both Nik and I are, and we're connected because we are both in the local Kansas City ag scene. And actually, Nik, in brief, do you want to describe your experiences as it relates to these topics first?
Sure. There was a prominent local agriculture group here in Kansas City that had a fairly strong internet presence many years ago. And a friend of mine and I saw all these exciting things. They were teaching how to make soap and how to grow mushrooms, and they were showing how interesting their community is and how much momentum they had and all these good things they were doing. And I think we were both instantly sold on that idea. You know, we're like, here's these people that are taking people, you know, fresh out of prison or recovering addicts, and they're giving them some purpose in life and giving them community. And, you know, just look at all this good urban agriculture that they're doing. And so we were instantly sold on the idea. We wanted to combine our cycling nonprofit with their agriculture and their youth outreach and kind of meld these things together. So, and kind of have things. I was living in Portland at the time. It was, the idea was like, we would borrow some of their ideas. We would have, after our bicycle rides, we'd do a little agriculture, like in some raised beds. We would do some composting. We had some chickens for a little bit, you know, like just little things. And like what we would bring here was a cycling program, and we really wanted to network with them. So after some back and forth over the course of a few years, we bought a few houses here. We bought a big bus to bring cycling equipment here. And we sort of did. I ended up just like coming here and integrating full time. I became a construction foreman for this group. And when I first got here, there was a thriving community. There was interns, college age interns in the summers. There was volunteers every weekend. Like some were regulars. Like there was a good handful of people that just showed up every weekend. And then there was like, you know, people would kind of come and go. Sometimes you'd see the same faces like, you know, every other month or so, you know. And there was like a whole community built around that, like lots of people that had interest in this sort of thing. But things would get kind of hairy, like as we tried to like expand any of our ideas, or if anybody had anything to say that was outside of the leader's scope, it was really dismissed. People were kind of like pushed out of things. So it's really a case where there was interest and there was people that wanted to show up and do the good thing, but they couldn't be properly supported. There was lots of clash about how things should be managed. And then I would certainly say that COVID really did a number on things, along with some failures of the leadership. They kind of just brought things apart. And I think like a lot of the other places that we have networked with over the years, you see that they have a lot of the same problems, and a lot of them are financial problems, because how do you turn a profit on any of this? Like, how do you keep things going? How do you keep paying people without like maybe doing some things that are away from the scope of what you're trying to do, right? So like we wanted to have a successful like market garden greenhouse sort of situation, but we couldn't fund this without doing Airbnb and kind of causing some gentrification. So if we're supposed to be for the community, like, is Airbnb good for the community? I think that's pretty debatable. So you would just have things like that, like capital was in the way of the community, even in our most successful times.
Mm-hmm. And I would say even in the more successful times, it was still heavily limiting the quality of the workers that would come around and especially stay around, you know. And that's why so many of these, like this is one example, but it's a pretty ubiquitous thing. They're dependent on volunteers, interns, apprentices. And then even the people that are getting paid to run these programs are usually not getting paid much. So they've taken their own kind of vow of poverty, which inherently limits what this is ever going to become.
Yes. That is true. The whole time I was being a foreman at this place, I was making a third of what I could make elsewhere.
Yeah, so could we back up, kind of given that you were in effect sacrificing for yourself because you believed in this cause, but you ran up against a sort of power dynamic, as I guess I'm conceiving it anyway, where
Absolutely.
yeah, whereby like the people at the top were basically saying, we want things to do, we want it to go this way, and we don't want to listen to anybody else. And how much do you think that got in the way of this thing being successful and eventually like kind of coming apart? Is that a major factor?
It was a major factor, I think. You know, we had some people that were very interested in specific sorts of things. I mean, let's just say like woodworking, textiles, people that had like, I would say master craftsmanship level experience in some of these things. And, you know, they were either unsupported or just, how's best to say it? Maybe just treated like they weren't as valuable as they are, because like I think it's a lot for somebody that could be making a lot of money to like say, well, yeah, I'll be here and I'll teach people how to use equipment, and I'll teach people how to create things. But if they make one tiny mistake, they're like as good as, you know, somebody that doesn't know anything, you know, like nobody's abilities, I think, are taken into account.
So, I mean, it sounds like the mistake of treating volunteers or quasi-volunteers as though they're kind of like employees, pure and simple, with no agency.
Yes. Also treating 1099 and subcontractors as though they're employees, you know, like demanding that they work certain specific hours and that sort of thing. Like that's not what a subcontractor does.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've learned from my own volunteer experience as well as from my family, I mean, even growing up, I mean, this was a fairly like common thing to discuss actually, is that you know, if you have people basically helping you out of the goodness of their hearts, or at least like partly in that regard, out of the goodness of their hearts, then you have to give them some agency, and you have to listen to them. You're all kind of on the same team, and to treat people who are there willingly to help you out as though they're employees or servants is a huge mistake. It's not realistic either, because they can just go away whenever they feel like it. They don't have to stay and do this, and you miss out on like those master craftsmen. Like apparently they missed out on a lot of what they would have to offer because it didn't fit in with this leadership's pre-existing agenda. That's a common mistake.
Or even more so, as though they were a hindrance in some cases. Like they were, one was dubbed a culture-killing Eeyore.
What? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
He was a guy who everybody liked, even. Everybody except for the leader of this organization.
Yeah, so even though it's a nonprofit, I think, you know, I mean, this is really interesting because I teach a class in public administration. We deal with nonprofits as a subject matter. Mm-hmm. And, you know, nonprofits have a different dynamic, or should, than a business. Even a business leader who's good shouldn't dictate to the people, you know, should like try to get their buy-in and things like that. But much more so with a nonprofit, because it's all really voluntary. And like you said, the people who are employed by them tend to get paid less. So part of the reason they're there is because they believe in the mission. So, you know, getting not only their buy-in, but their active participation, and kind of using what they have, what they bring to the table is really, really important in a nonprofit.
And to briefly zoom out, where Nik and I somewhat disagree on our take on management, not that we totally disagree, but like I usually find myself making this devil's advocate argument of we don't know what the manager would have been like if he hadn't been running this de facto nonprofit business and he was feeling all this pressure to basically succeed in terms that would be financially successful.
I agree with that anyway.
Yeah, I know you do, but it's hard a lot of times. Like we can say that intellectually, but then when we're emotionally frustrated with the person in question, I feel like we tend to lose sight of that, and it does become personal as opposed to the impersonal. The irony of what we're laying out with this nonprofit is that a place that was supposed to be about urban farming and community is run like a failing small for-profit business. And that is its own failure of organization, not disconnected from, but distinct from the failure to stop the fracking, would you say?
Sure. And I think we could point to when things were the most successful, the leadership was actively pursuing grants and finding ways to raise money, and things were able to build up. And then there came a point where, they no longer seemed in fundraising or seemed to have the interest in really running things at all, after they had done a significant amount of damage to the community and to the nonprofit at large.
And so that's the case. So while this is unfolding, and I totally agree with you that COVID accelerated these tendencies that were already happening. In the process, I've moved to Kansas City, and I've talked on Laurie's political philosophy channel in the past about the Mort Collective I started with some friends, and our attempts to somewhat work with this nonprofit. We've done some work with other local ag nonprofits, or at least another relatively prominent one. And then the idea was, in the process, this would be like our public lives or our jobs. And then our private lives, we would start homesteading and doing our own side market garden business. And then the incredibly naive hope was that this would function as a loss leader, so we could start doing education in person and online, and that this would lead to somewhere, both in terms of being able to like positively impact our society and also allowing us to take more control over our lives and lead more ethical and ecologically friendly lives. That was my naive hope. And it's like, while the local ag scene is making that hard, also I'm finding out how hard it is to organize one of these quasi nonprofits on my own, and you've had kind of a front row seat to that.
Yeah, and I would say even my efforts to like continue to try to organize, like even with people that we have and who are interested, like I could offer them money, more money than they make, and they still don't seem to have.
When they say they want money, right?
Oh yes, when they specifically, several of these people have come to me looking for money, having an interest in what we're doing, enjoying what we've set up, and I still can't get them to show up to do pretty easy work.
Right. And the cherry on top is we've been trying to work with this other intentional community in the area, and we've just, me and my girlfriend especially, and Laurie's had to suffer through a lot of the breakdown of it, as have you, Nik. In a way, I feel like the most disappointing intercommunal breakdown has occurred in the last month with the people that I had hoped were sort of the most qualified and promising. I almost feel, I understand, like I never have, why, like, people that it's a stereotype, like you've gone to prison and you come out with like a face tat that says trust nobody. I understand it now. Like that's kind of how I feel like, can you do anything with anyone?
Yeah, it's disappointing. But I think we're establishing that it's really common that, people go into things with good intentions, and then time after time, they slowly derail themselves. You know, I've been involved in organizations too here in Manhattan that have gotten nowhere. You know, like everybody gets together and they're enthused and they want to do something to help the local, you know, environmental organization is what I was last in. And all we did was get together and like talk and do absolutely nothing. And interpersonal breakdowns started before we even got to doing anything, you know, personality conflicts and such. Like Nik talks about how they wanted to, they were like, well, we need to get t-shirts, we need to make posters, and we need to do this, and we need to do that. And, you know, people treat these activities as though it's kind of like a space for their self-actualization and their personal development and things like that, rather than a goal that's beyond them.
I mean, here's the thing: is like with all these different organizations, like you can't just point to just one thing. Like you could look at some things and you could say, well, there's a lack of motivation among the people that should be helping this, even if they're like their ideologies align with this thing, you know. Or you could say like, well, the leadership, you know, didn't do enough things to like actively seek funding in another case. You know, like there's just so many factors about why these things fail that it's like there's no one thing that you can point to. Like you always have this problem of scale. You know, if you're trying to like move up and outreach to more people, well, you need more people and you need more resources to do that, you know. So like really that's what it's all about, getting the people together and having the resources to sustain it. But there's like too many factors that can just bring that all down so easily, where it's like, even if you're just like trying to get a group of people together to do something as simple as show up at a meeting, like all you had to do is drive there and be seen there, you know. Like you still got to wonder why we couldn't get there.
Right. And then I really want to, along those lines, I want to dwell on that, on the image you've laid out with the fracking, because the more I think about it, the more I think maybe this is what we've been encountering in Kansas City. But the irony of you can't even get people who say they care to show up to a meeting to put some last ditch political pressure on people to stop, on like representatives to stop some fracking permits from being issued or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And while you cannot even do that, the gas is literally being fracked out already, or it might be even gone at that point. So it is you are so far behind the curve. You're so far behind the curve that the game is already over and you're failing at playing the game.
Yeah, I think you could apply that to the farming as well. Like there's not a good resource for you to get your product into people's hands because nobody can afford what it costs to have organic local produce.
Mm-hmm. And even the people, even as we try and sift around and find people who care and try and organize ourselves to do these half-assed projects that we hope are going to bootstrap to another level, already people have been so dominated by capitalism and so psychologically traumatized by all the bullshit in their lives, sin, if you will, that the projects are already rotting while we're trying to carry them out.
Well, maybe that's why most of the time their activity in these types of projects amounts to an attempt at self-expression or self-actualization, because deep down inside, people know that's all they've got. Like the larger game has already been played out and they don't have a chance of winning that, right? So, but they can still like kind of try to stake a claim to who they are and what they stand for. Maybe that's kind of what you're running into when you run into like the one person, because in my experience too, it's oftentimes it just boils down to the one person in an organization that becomes the obstacle to everything, right? Like that person is so involved in it being about them leading something that they become obnoxious and not really inclusive, even though there's always a great deal of talk of inclusivity in these types of organizations, right? You're all on the same team, you're all equal, right? But actually there's one person who's like really quite obnoxious, frankly. And I've quit more than one organization on the basis of that one person, where I just say to myself, I'm just not going back. I'm not listening to them anymore. It's a waste of my time, or it's just unpleasant. And, because you begin to see it's really the name show. It's really whatever, whoever that is, show.
Right. It's really this sad racket.
Yeah.
Or cult in the modern sense of the word.
Yeah.
And instead of a stepping stone for the positive change you desperately want. But sorry, go ahead, Nik.
I think we can apply that to both of the places that we're referring to in this conversation. That there is one person who's makes it so difficult to do the things that are required to do that it makes everyone else lose hope in this situation. Though there's also kind of an opposite thing. Before Spencer arrived, there were like just a couple months before that, there was a time where I was on the campus and there was nobody. And I was like going about my day and I was doing things. And I remember just like walking down the sidewalk and just like how quiet it was. I walked into one of our buildings where there would normally be, you'd be smelling the smell of the laser printer going. Somebody was making some sort of craft in there. Or, there'd be somebody doing something in the greenhouse, and you would just run into people. And then there was all of a sudden, there was just nobody. And I was like, man, this isn't much of a community if I'm just here bumbling about by myself, And that was the first time that happened, and there's been periods like that again. And we're kind of in one right now where there's just nothing going on. There's nothing for anybody to have an interest in. And we're just kind of bumbling about doing the day-to-day, like just the maintenance sort of things that need done, because there's nothing left. There is no community. There's no projects really to happen. And it's just like, we're just maintaining this area that we've kind of gentrified.
Wow. So there's no programming.
No programming at all. There's no youth outreach. There's no community outreach.
Wow.
Like
yeah, kind of the core, as I remember from visiting a few times, was the youth outreach, like having the youth show up and learn about urban farming and just take a tour and maybe do some voluntary cleanup and things like that. That was kind of like the thing that happened all the time. And
yeah,
now,
it was great.
Yeah.
COVID is what killed the youth outreach for sure. But then by the time it came that like we could have youth outreach again, there was some political things going on. And the leader of the organization had kind of ostracized himself. And there was just no way to bring that back. So like it's come to the point where we got to wonder what are we even maintaining? And I think personally I've lost all the interest, because it's like we're not doing anything anymore. We're not helping anybody. We're not making this community nicer. The community is nicer. They put new sidewalks in. The housing market has gone through the roof. Like it's the very first time I was through here, I was like, man, this is a rough neighborhood. And when I first moved here, I was like, holy cow, here's some junkie hauling a hot water tank down to the scrapyard. Like there was just crime everywhere and it was crazy. Well, now it's, the neighborhood can still have some weird stuff going on. It's an inner city neighborhood, but it's like, it's so much nicer than what it was. There's a part of me that says, oh, mission accomplished in a way, but also like, well, all the youth programming is gone, the community is gone, and like we're left with just maintaining properties.
But maybe that's we've talked in past episodes about the abstract domination of capital and how that drives a lot. And my sense would be the equivalent of the fracking, Chevron already drank your milkshake, is Okay, you were this cute nonprofit, you did some things, and now in an area where houses used to sell for 10 to 40 grand, now vacant lots sell for 10 to 40 grand.
Mm-hmm.
And relationships have been blown up. Some people have been politically radicalized. Other people are burned out. And now it's prepped for the artists to move in. And then give it another few decades, and then the young professionals will move in. And mission accomplished.
Yeah. Yeah, you get that feeling of mission accomplished when you're just like, oh, it's really nice.
Even though the
clean.
nonprofit you guys have worked at didn't have much to do with accomplishing the mission, right?
Well, because the mission was impossible. The mission, to put it in these analogous fracking terms, the mission was stop the fracking. That's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Or in this neighborhood, I would say like the neighbors kind of keyed off of things that we were doing too. Like there's neighbors just in every direction that are doing all kinds of their own gardening, and like we spent years like pulling debris. We filled so many dumpsters. Like, when we stopped doing the cleanup, it starts coming back, and it becomes clear to me that we're the only ones that pick up anything in that neighborhood. We're the only ones removing tires. We're the only ones dealing with the box springs and mattresses that get dropped off. We're the only ones picking up the trash. Like, other neighbors that have moved in have made the houses nicer, and I think that has to do with more with the market going up. But like, if you looked at what our little section of the neighborhood was, years ago, you would have never thought that it would be like it is today, because it was just burnt out houses. I got my house there for $30,000. There's a house right up the street from that house that just sold for $260,000. Wow. 6 or 7 years ago, that house wasn't worth anywhere near that.
Wow. Well, it sounds like there would have been a place for them to pivot in this new and better neighborhood. That has not been possible because basically the thing has just ground to a halt. But it's not like I would also
argue that that's all just a shiny veneer. The neighborhood isn't better because we're still not, like, there's still just like kids wandering around with nothing to do that could be taking part in programming or learning how to garden or doing anything really. Like we used to have lots of different people with lots of different interests, and those people could have reached out to any of these community members, and now they're not even here to do that.
Yeah, a lot of loss.
Like it's not even an option. So yeah, it's like in that respect, it's just like whatever. It's just another piece of middle America, I suppose, which was, maybe naive of me to think that it could be more than that if we had this community of like-minded people. Everybody's like doing projects and helping each other. When there was a lot of people there, like there was always somebody that would just like take a pause from what they were doing and come give you a hand, or you'd be in the middle of something and be like, oh yeah, let me help you with that. Like when you have that activity around and so many people, like you can branch out in a lot of different ways. Like now none of that's an option. So that's why it just, even though it's nicer, it feels like nothing. It doesn't feel nicer as a member of the community.
Or put another way, I mean, I came there to do urban farming, but the main thing I do is throw away trash.
Yeah.
That's, to me, that's the version of like the milkshake that's been drunk. Is that no. You want to mow the lawns? Okay, then you're in the real estate industry. Then you can get your cut. You want to take out trash? Great.
What was the biggest obstacle? What was the biggest obstacle to the urban farming from your operation?
It doesn't make money. And we live in a society, there's this romantic critique that says, oh, it shouldn't be about the money. Fair enough. I agree with it. But like, I agree with it to the extent that, yes, we should try and create a world where we're not fully dominated by our need to make money. But to the extent that money in this society is how we show the value of what people are doing and support them for doing it. If money doesn't keep flowing in, then basically independently wealthy people can do it charitably, but otherwise you can't make a living doing it. As soon as you're like, oh, we're going to grow a small amount of specialty organic produce, oh, and I'm going to have to figure out how to market and deliver it, you shouldn't be doing it. That's the equivalent of trying to organize the city council to stop the fracking as the fracking already happened. And I was wildly naive in thinking, not that like it would be possible to make a large amount of money, but I didn't realize it was like nigh impossible. And that therefore it couldn't be a way to bootstrap us or be a loss leader to more lucrative opportunities and more fulfilling communal arrangements.
Because I'm sure you did your share of like talking to well-meaning people who totally were on board with the idea that local organic agriculture is better. And, you know, I envision you kind of having the same sort of like situation that Nik did with his, you know, trying to get well-meaning, kind of well-informed people to actually do something in that field. Like, you weren't just dealing with folks in the neighborhood, right? You did try to like,
which is its own contradiction, that we're trying to build communally locally, but what we're really doing is trying to sell to richer people in the exurbs. But
yeah, well, again, a lot of those people in the exurbs would like say, yeah, I'm totally on board with you know, organic local agriculture. I think it's great.
Yeah.
So you know, like in your experience, what do you encounter when you actually deal with those people?
The first thing that pops into my head is, what's the name of that restaurant that claims to be all local organic? Because they want to market themselves that way. They want to charge those kinds of prices. But if you actually knew what their suppliers were, you would see that it is not as local or organic as they claim it to be.
Yeah. Although to clarify,
nobody can afford it.
As far as I know, they are all organic. It's just industrial organic, and they're not going to support local stuff.
Ah, sure.
Yeah. And like a lot of the old heads like Elliot Coleman would say, just because you see a USDA organic label on something doesn't mean that they haven't hollowed out the definitions at the federal level of what counts as USDA organic.
So this is a restaurant who like gets customers on the basis of being ethically like super responsible.
Vegan is kind of a shtick.
Yeah, okay. And puts itself up as supporting local agriculture. So
see,
like,
I don't know that they exactly make that latter claim, but maybe this gets to your point. The fact that you can market yourself as vegan and clean and progressive and minimalist, and yet our local lettuce is allegedly too expensive.
Yeah, because I know if I went to a restaurant like that here in Manhattan that had that kind of vibe, I would probably have envisioned in my mind anyway that they would have been sourcing their stuff from the 10 to 15 like local farmers in the area for the freshest and most, you know, ethical strategy for getting their ingredients. That would have just kind of come with you know, obviously that's an expectation I should get rid of in my head, but like that's probably what a lot of people going to a restaurant like that would expect.
And that's why it's you know, the vibe, as the kids say, it's greenwashing. And it's I think a word that can encompass everything we've talked about in this podcast and the last with Nik is superficial. Like what seems to be happening on the surface, or what we think we're trying to accomplish, is not what's actually happening.
So you're there to serve people's like sense of conscience, like to
that's what I've had to accept. Yeah, that at best I'm like an artist or some sort of poorly paid therapist that can allow privileged people to indulge in false delusions about who they actually are and what they're actually doing.
I've got an idea for a business model.
Mm-hmm.
You like create a subscription for $50 bags of lettuce that you deliver once a month with a label that says locally grown and organic, right? And well, you might have to like, I don't know, once a month would do, because then they would be able to say that they had bought and served local lettuce, and you wouldn't have to make a ton of deliveries. I wonder how many of those you could sell.
Well, a number of restaurants also make that move too. Even a number of restaurants that we sell to are mixing our lettuce with other lettuces and then calling it local lettuce. And I don't want to complain, because these are the rare few that buy it all. That's where my bar's at. But even still, even if we could fully sell out of our lettuce, the problem is we don't have enough lettuce to sell. That we're at a small enough scale where it cannot work. If the point is to have stable and consistent and respectable revenue that will incentivize responsible and reliable and dedicated people to keep producing the lettuce, it does not make sense. It has to be maintained by like me and my girlfriend and our relative privilege and our insanity about trying to accomplish what is probably unaccomplishable.
I know a lot of like people who make good money and who do vibe with local organic agriculture, but who still cannot quite deal with two things. One, being kind of told this is what you're going to eat on like at any given month of the year. And number two, and maybe more important, is just like the difference between the local price and the like cheap grocery store price.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's no getting around that those two things, they're hard when you're like used to basically you're in bargain shopping mode all the time,
Mm-hmm.
But
keep in mind, you're talking about like well-educated and privileged professionals.
Exactly. People who could well afford paying double for their groceries, but they don't want to, like people in this country are trained to feel they're spending a shit ton of money, pardon my French, but on all sorts of things they don't need, but at the same time, they want to feel really good about getting a bargain on, especially it seems like stuff that they actually need, like the essentials of life. They're bargain hunters. And it's really hard to like habituate people differently.
Which again, the superficiality, they're the type of people that are enlightened and want to support good businesses. But then you ask for the moderate amount, the Nik's fracking story equivalent of show up to the meeting, say pay 5 to 20% more for your food. They can't even do that. So forget about the wider, the wider food scene revolution I'd like to see of like everybody backyard gardening and having communal orchards and all of this stuff, and then supporting cooperatives. No. We can't. That is too far gone. We can't even show up to the meetings.
Mm-hmm. I think the thought originally behind, local ag was, at the larger level was like, well, first we'll sell it to the people who can afford it, who will surely like want to support it. And then that will allow us to grow and become bigger, and we will be able to lower our costs a little bit, and we'll include then other people, right? But you've got to start somewhere. So you start with the people that you think you can rely on. Mm-hmm. And the ugly truth seems to be you can't rely on them because they're too embedded and ingrained in the economic system as it is. They're too well habituated and trained.
I think so.
Yeah.
Or to the extent, even if you can rely on them, you can't, there's still this hard structural limit to maybe there is an elite. And I think there is, like, I could see like an Elliot Coleman perspective on this situation would be, hey, well, the fact that you can go to a grocery store and buy stuff that's certified organic now, as opposed to 30 years ago, is a triumph. And I think that's true. And that's the type of thing that our system can afford. But as soon as you're like, ooh, maybe we should change how we live our lives, or maybe we should more democratize how available real organic food is, or maybe we shouldn't undermine what organic actually means so that like Walmart can be the biggest seller of organic food. Maybe that's not really a good definition of organic. That's when you get this hard limit.
Because people do forget that there's people who need jobs, who would have jobs, meaningful jobs, if they did do that, if they didn't go for Cal Organic, right? And I mean, you could multiply that by many different things, right? There's the local business generally is being destroyed. It's pretty much destroyed. And so there's a ton of people who used to be able to be small business owners and employees of small businesses, local businesses,
that are out of those businesses now and are plunged into much more precarious employment as a result.
Mhm.
But nobody thinks about that when they are making their buying choices. They think about, the bottom line.
So when you were talking about how small business is slowly dying, and I
Mhm.
think your point was going to be, but it doesn't matter because they're a bunch of sort of revanchists, probably white supremacist reactionaries, and they deserve it. And this is a weird kind of reparations. Was that going
That
to be your
wasn't where I was going to go. No, but no. No. Although, is that what a lot of people think? Like good riddance to bad rubbish, basically? All
I
right.
think so. We can just have enlightened progressive corporate leadership and it'll all be fine.
Well, it looks like we're kind of experiencing the revenge of some of those folks at the moment, or at least they're threatening revenge. I think not only would our society be better off if we hadn't driven people out of those types of businesses, but also I think our experience of our own communities would have been better.
The capital needed to drink their milkshake.
I mean, an awful lot of progressives have just completely accepted that and actually seem to be full square behind that trend.
As long as we can get more Black and trans leadership in these corporations, it'll be fine. What do you say to this, Nik?
Well, I mean, yeah, like the serious point there is that, a lot of progressives have basically traded real radicalism for identity politics, because they long ago gave up the battle for working class people and small businesses. That's the truth. That's very, very obvious.
That sounds accurate to me.
Right. But from their privileged jobs, they will say they support ecologically friendly stuff as long as it means they can continue to live in their vinyl coated McMansions in the suburbs.
Sure.
And as long as they get the latest entertainment delivered to them through the internet.
Yeah, don't get me started on vinyl coating. I'm sure Nik feels the same way. I think that's an atrocity.
I feel that way about MDF and styrofoam, plastic bags.
Yep, I think the way I always boil things down to the simplest possible terms. And to me, that's hypocrisy, is basically what we're talking about here, is that a lot of people on these issues have turned into hypocrites who want to talk a good line and want to be sort of superficially identified with it, whether it's anti-fracking or urban farming or, local ag or whatever it is, climate change. That's it. They want to be identified with it. They want to be able to say, I'm for this. But they don't actually want to change their habits or behaviors or their voting strategy in any meaningful way.
Let alone change their actual lifestyle and struggle very hard to organize with other people.
Right. Which would mean putting aside your petty desire for power and personal expression in favor of just sucking it up and keeping your eye on a goal. So it's very frustrating, but rather than wallow in anger, which I feel like we're doing, which is totally somewhat enjoyable and understandable, but we all have experienced this now quite a bit. Any thoughts on how you overcome this if you can? What possible avenue is there to overcoming this so that people can cooperate in some way? Whether it's let's grant that we can't defeat capital, all right? But nevertheless, there are some good things that could be done. Any thoughts about how you avoid some of these pitfalls of interpersonal BS and hypocrisy?
I think that a lot of people that would have the motivation to keep fighting these so disillusioned, the amount of resistance that they get from the other side of their cause, be it the government by whatever means, but and the lack of passion for the people that they're fighting for, that most people that have the ambition to continue fighting causes in the name of the environment, I feel tired of it. They can't do it anymore. The people that they're trying to help don't even want to help, and so you just get disillusioned. You just say like, what am I even doing this for? And you drop out. You know, I think there's a part of everybody that has knowledge about what's going on in the world, wishes they could just become ignorant and enjoy the bliss and maybe just meld right back in. But the problem is that once you know something, you can't unknow it. And so, like, the the best thing you can do is to just continue your education, continue sharing your education with other people, and doing whatever it is that you can do. Because, like, other than that, you're just flailing without purpose. And, you know, like, what good is that to you? What good is that to anyone?
Well, I mean, that's a decent point. What else are you going to do? Because you don't want to just sort of wave the white flag entirely. The only thing I have to offer is I think that you have to go into these situations assuming that there's a great potential for it to turn into a shit show rather than being surprised by that, right? Like, you need to go into it assuming that it probably is going to try to turn into that, and that maybe ground rules need to be established pretty early in the game of interpersonal interaction and what really are our goals, and is everybody really on board with these actions? If you're not, get out. Like, there needs to be some more structure, and like going into things a little bit more cynicism, so that maybe some of these organizations and groups would have a better chance of surviving themselves to get to some sort of goal. Because I think a lot of us, we go into these, I know I have, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm finally in friendly territory. Everybody here agrees, like we all are on the same page. And then what you find out is that agreement is pretty superficial, as we've discussed, but the interpersonal stuff and the ambitions and the desire for belonging and the desire for acceptance and for like self-expression and all these other things that you never even anticipated, they come out, you know, and now you're like, what am I even dealing with? Right. So by the time you figure it out, like, you just want to get out of there and walk away. I think from now on, you got to go into situations realizing that you're dealing with extremely flawed people, including yourself, of course, and that therefore extra precautions have to be taken so that it doesn't automatically turn into a shit show. That's my contribution.
But here's my pushback to this. So I'm thinking of this latest fiasco of like communication breakdown. I thought I had come in with limited expectations. I thought I was being sober. Because I thought we had a baseline of agreement and mutual understanding that we could basically be reasonable and actually talk to each other.
Yeah, right.
And what I learned was that no, we don't even have that. I thought there was still gas under the ground to protect, but actually the whole thing has been dead from the beginning.
Well, and the only thing I would say is, like, that's 2 years down the road, right? So what I'm proposing is right from the start, right, 2 years ago-ish, like, or whenever that association really started, maybe not assume, and I would have thought that you could assume certain things too, right? But like, maybe don't assume. Well, I think I did. Yeah, right. But now I've learned something, which is that you can't assume anything. And so, like, right away, if you're like joining or attempting to cooperate with anybody else, any sort of organization, I think probably it's appropriate to lay your cards right on the table and say, this is what I'm interested in. This is, you know, who I am. This is how I want to interact. You know, let's sit down and talk about this and see if we can come up with a comfortable way to do it. Now, the people on the other end of that treatment might feel a little bit weird, like, why are we having this intense talk right now? So what? You know, like, because I wouldn't want to like have another 2 years go by and find out again that, you know, what we're dealing with is impossible to work with.
I don't know. What do you think, Nik?
I think even if you feel like you're banging your head against the wall, at least you've got the wall. And I don't think you would be happy just staring at the wall without trying to climb it.
Well, if you'd have gone into the fracking activism really aware that probably most of the people that you were working with were not serious and wouldn't ultimately not do anything, would you have done anything differently?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly would have just cut out a lot of these people and said, you know what, why don't we just do what we're doing? Why don't we go talk to these other organizations that we communicated with? Why don't we just like go the legal route and not mess with making this stupid ass parade float?
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
like nobody wanted to sit there for 10 hours making little tissue roses. That was insane. What good
Wow,
did
you
it do?
did that.
Like-minded but useless.
Like-minded but useless. And I think that's true. Every organization I've participated in since, there's a lot of people that are like-minded, but they don't have it.
Well, dudes, one of these days we need to like actually give folks like some reason to live and hope.
I know this is some rough shit.
Today is not the day. Yeah.